on the dialectical character and accidental unity of a Thomistic Epistemology, a presentation by Mark Langley for Dr. Philip Yates' Epistemology and Logic course at Holy Apostles College and Seminary during the summer of 2020. An oddity. While known by his followers as eminently thorough and comprehensive, St. Thomas Aquinas does not appear to take up a study of epistemology as such. While many defenders of St. Thomas insist that the medieval philosopher has an epistemology, or at least that he succeeds virtually in standing up to the challenges of epistemological critique, the questions of epistemology, of what is knowledge and whether we can know anything at all, or again, whether the object of knowledge can be something beyond the knowing subject himself, and if so, whether the ultimate reality of such an external object might be material, and whether some other thinking thing might be required as source of the content, etc., are apparently not among St. Thomas's primary concerns, as they are for nearly all philosophers since Descartes. Indeed, epistemology as a delineated field of study, like biology or theology, a special type of logos, seems not to have become formalized until the modern period. The term epistemology, moreover, though hardly innovative, was coined by mid-19th century Scottish philosopher James Frederick Ferrier. Did the universal doctor miss something? Our approach, while assigning retroactive distinctions such as critical realism or methodical realism, sheds some light on the methods of the perennial philosophy and the reality of knowledge. And while we recognize the value of showing that St. Thomas's teachings are not made obsolete by the novel objections of epistemologists of the modern era, as Maritain and Gilson have done quite well, this will not be our approach. We think rather that it may be more illuminating to answer why St. Thomas, following Aristotle, did not undertake epistemology formally or even consider it a distinct, i.e., essentially unified intellectual discipline. A proviso. When the Thomist hears of an ology as biology or theology, anthropology, or epistemology, he likely thinks it names a species of human science, i.e., demonstrative knowledge unified according to a formal object. Theology, for example, is the science about God. Biology, the science of organic bodily things. Admittedly, this understanding of the construction with ology is restrictive. One hears the term teleology, for example, used today to mean roughly purposeful behavior, not exactly the science of purpose. Again, one hears of phenomenology, which apparently names a method of thought. Although for all who use it, epistemology evidently signifies a branch of knowledge or inquiry. The term admits of ambiguity. Is it a knowledge or a mere inquiry? Who can say before doing epistemology? For the epistemologist who ultimately denies the possibility of knowledge should call it a mere inquiry, while he who affirms it will more likely call it a knowledge. The standard, however, for the unification of a knowledge, to speak of quote-unquote a knowledge even sounds foreign to the contemporary ear, is now not as strict as traditionally it was. The standard of unification for knowledge is today less like that used to delineate a natural species and more like that which unifies a task committee's agenda, such as gender and family studies, unquote. Nevertheless, St. Thomas did not deal in accidentally unified fields of knowledge, and in each work he makes clear to which particular science he is devoted. So in asking whether St. Thomas did epistemology, we would reasonably consider first whether he undertook it as a formally unified field of knowledge. What is epistemology? A working account of epistemology can be gathered from the survey The Philosophy of Knowledge by Kenneth Gallagher. He says, quote, "Therefore, the critical enterprise in which epistemology undertakes to review the value of our habitual knowledge can be constructed as an attempt to discriminate between what is solid and what is fragile in our common sense convictions. The difficulty is, however, to find a criterion in terms of which this discrimination can be made," unquote. Epistemology's core work is to, quote, "discriminate between the solid and fragile of our habitual knowledge and common sense convictions." Note two things about the preceding account. One, it is unclear from this text what is the genus of epistemology. Besides enterprise or attempt, we think this fitting more so than positing the genus as knowledge or science, for this would imply that there is an adequation of the mind to reality, a point that it calls into question. Two, for the object of epistemology, from which one may take its species-making difference, is found primarily at a radical level of possible knowledge, assumption, and conviction. It tests, quote, "habitual knowledge," and, quote, "common sense convictions." We see that this accurately aligns with its history as a modern field, thought in the wake of Descartes. And it seems not a stretch to say that epistemology is predicated upon radical doubt. It assumes nothing. Thus, Gallagher points out the difficulty of finding a criterion according to which to proceed in the field. St. Thomas's division of the philosophical science does not include epistemology. Having seen the account of epistemology, especially as involving radical doubt, one might doubt that St. Thomas has one, for St. Thomas is evidently optimistic, if you will, about the prospects of knowing. We will confirm that epistemology has no place in St. Thomas's division of philosophical sciences in two steps. One, epistemology is not included in St. Thomas's first exhaustive division into most general speculative or practical sciences. We will leave aside the division of practical sciences, as it would evidently not be found there. The second step, nor is it a subpart of a branch of speculative philosophy, except qualifiedly. Here is St. Thomas's first division of the speculative philosophical sciences. This is in Boethius's De Trinitate, question 5, article 1. Part of what is called his division and methods of the sciences, seen in its full glory through a 2x2 crisscross chart. Note that the division is exhaustive because each principle of division is exhaustive. Sciences are divided by differences in their objects, but not by any difference of the object, only by differences in the object as object. An object is an object of speculative science by its intelligibility, which in turn depends on its separateness from matter, the principle of change. Thus, the principle of the division is the degree of separateness from matter, as the following chart shows. And we might look at the chart here. Notice if the object of our knowledge depends on matter for its being or its existence, and it also depends on matter for its being understood or defined, this is the branch of science we call physics or natural science. But if the object depends on matter for its being or existence, but does not depend on matter for its being understood or defined, this is what we call mathematics. So, for example, we might find triangles and rectangles in material things in their shapes, but when we define a triangle or a rectangle, we don't include the matter in the definition. Thirdly, if the object does not depend on matter for its being or existence, and it does not depend on matter for its being understood or defined, this is the branch of science we call metaphysics or first philosophy, or even divine science. And these are the three sciences that St. Thomas divides. Note the exhaustiveness. Epistemology as subpart of a speculative science. Nowhere in this central text, the division and methods of the sciences, or elsewhere, does St. Thomas mention epistemology. Confer also the commentary on Nicomachean Ethics, in which St. Thomas gives another division of sciences, but again does not mention epistemology. Nor does it fit as a part within one of the mentioned speculative sciences. This can be seen in two ways. We suggest one, inductively, from St. Thomas's lack of mention of it in any place in which he gives subparts of the sciences, and two, by looking at the respective objects of the three speculative sciences. Again, the former would involve a long induction, including a case-by-case analysis of text, which we cannot pursue here because of limits of time and space. But let us briefly consider the latter in order to see that the objects of the sciences given in the above division exclude epistemology, and thus that epistemology cannot comprise a subpart of one of these sciences. In natural science must exclude epistemology, for as Aristotle and St. Thomas following him insist, it takes up as its principle that nature and motion exist. Nor apparently does natural science, the study of mobile being, have the universality that epistemology would need in order to discriminate concerning all assumptions and knowledge. A similar argument applies to mathematics, though no one to our knowledge holds that epistemology is a part of mathematics. The object of math is quantity, which is again too limited or particular for the sweeping work of epistemology. Note that this is not to say that epistemology might not touch upon things of natural philosophy or mathematics. It is just to say that epistemology does not comprise a complete science within those disciplines. Metaphysics seems, however, the best candidate in which epistemology might be found as a subpart in St. Thomas's corpus. Let us investigate. Metaphysics seems to contain epistemology. While St. Thomas's metaphysics concerns what is not dependent on matter for its existence or its definition, this does not mean that metaphysics lacks universality, say by only considering immaterial substances. Rather, metaphysics concerns being as being, whatever is and whatever has any share in being. If epistemology has any place in St. Thomas's metaphysics, it would seem to align with the following one of the three particular functions of metaphysics stated by Aristotle. He says, quote, "Hence, he who understands beings as beings should be able to state the firmest principles of all things. This person is the philosopher," unquote. St. Thomas follows Aristotle on this point, that the first principles or axioms are a proper consideration of the metaphysician, since investigating the first principles of our knowledge of things, and hence of the existence of things themselves, seems to be the accepted work of epistemology. Have we discovered St. Thomas's epistemology as some part of his metaphysics? Radical doubt addressed by St. Thomas. An indication that epistemology does indeed have a place within the perennial metaphysics arises in the context of St. Thomas's commentary on the metaphysics of Aristotle, whom St. Thomas considered to be, if not a philosopher, the preeminent philosopher. In Book 4 of his Metaphysics, Aristotle teaches that it belongs to the science of metaphysics to investigate the principles of being and consequently of our understanding, of which the first and most certain and fundamental is the principle of non-contradiction. Or as he puts it, the principle that, quote, "the same attribute cannot at the same time belong and not belong to the same subject and in the same respect." Or as St. Thomas puts it in his commentary, quote, "it is impossible for a thing to be and not to be simultaneously." Aristotle then addresses those who deny this principle or who ask for it to be demonstrated. He says that since demonstration must begin with things more known, and this principle is the most known, and the condition of our knowledge, it cannot be demonstrated. Yet arguments against it can be refuted as long as the opponent, quote, "says something," unquote, i.e. that he grants some premise from which to begin the argument. It seems that the perennial philosophy has touched upon perhaps the most fundamental epistemological inquiry, given that it investigates the most fundamental basis of knowledge. Have we at last located the science of epistemology within metaphysics? The dialectical character of Thomistic epistemology. We can confirm that epistemological inquiry in its most radical form has a place in Thomistic metaphysics. However, recalling the Aristotelian/Thomistic definition of a science, we see that this inquiry is not scientific. It does not proceed from proper principles that are more known and first, and by means of demonstrations, for it is about these very principles. Thus, it can only proceed dialectically, as St. Thomas points out. This is in accord with what Aristotle teaches in the Topics about dialectics, namely that dialectical inquiry is useful, quote, "for the first principles of each science. For nothing is able to be said about these first principles from the proper principles of the proposed science, since they are the first of all principles. But it is necessary to speak about these from those things which are probable in each. This, however, is either proper or at least most fitting to dialectic. For since dialectic is able to examine, it contains the way to the principles of all the sciences," unquote. Thus, though we find here a sort of epistemological inquiry, we cannot say that we have here a part of metaphysical science, but rather a merely dialectical inquiry pertinent to metaphysics, as any inquiry about the very first axioms of our knowledge can only be. Yet it should be said that this epistemological dialectic is not epistemological in the same mode in which Descartes and Kant would take it. For it does not truly begin with the radical doubt flowing from those violent, solitary movements of Descartes, but rather engages the skeptic's claims as known to be false, and does so solely for refutation or for disposing the learner to see the truth of the principles of the science more distinctly. The accidental unity of a Thomistic epistemology. We have thus located at least one quasi-epistemological consideration, arguably the most fundamental one, or the primary epistemological consideration in St. Thomas's work, but insisted that it is not properly called an epistemology in the strict sense, vis-a-vis the science of knowledge. Yet epistemologists address other questions as well, as can be gathered from a survey of the field and from the discussion of epistemology above. Questions as to how, in fact, we know, or rather how precisely the soul works in the operation of knowing, and questions concerning how words work so as to bring about knowledge. Let us move beyond the questions perhaps most epistemological, namely those of radical doubt, and address what we might call secondary epistemological considerations. Secondary epistemological considerations may be defined as those removed from radical doubt, but nonetheless addressing the possibility of knowledge. Assumptions are fair in this realm, and it is far more a search for causes than for matters of fact. In this sense, epistemology is taken up by St. Thomas in a scientific mode. However, it is not taken up as epistemology as such, but rather is fittingly pieced together as an accidental whole from various parts of various speculative arts and sciences. Thomistic epistemology is drawn from diverse sciences. We submit that secondary epistemological considerations are found in St. Thomas's work in three fields: logic, psychology, and metaphysics. Logic, as the science of speech as ordered to scientific knowledge or truth, is evidently epistemological insofar as it is a version of the question, how do we know? Admittedly, this discipline, by resolving to speech, does not satisfy ultimately the wonder of how we come to know. Psychology offers something more. Within psychology, man is studied as a knower, and here the causes of our wonderful power to know are discerned. This occurs, broadly speaking, in two steps. First, by identifying the characteristics and powers of soul that enable the acts of understanding and reasoning, and secondly, by identifying the external causes of such powers. The latter question quickly leads to metaphysics, wherein demonstrations are given for the existence of prior possessors of intellectual light, God and the angels, through whom we derive our light. Moreover, metaphysics, treating of the properties of being as being, reveals that it is a demonstrable property of actuality that it be intelligible. In this way, then, metaphysics contains demonstrations concerning both the intellect and the knower and the known. All of the preceding, and perhaps more, taken together may be rightly considered epistemology as long as this is understood as secondary, i.e., not involving radical doubt, and as an accidentally unified discipline. While various sciences have demonstrations concerning the possibility of knowing, these demonstrations exist properly in their respective bodies of knowledge. Only taken out of context and lumped together in what we call secondary Thomistic epistemology do these demonstrations find a unity. Why is epistemology either dialectical or secondary for St. Thomas? This fundamental difference between the Aristotelian Thomistic approach to questions about first principles and the approach of later epistemology has its basis in fact that St. Thomas and Aristotle view knowledge as essentially objective, while later epistemologists doubt that claim. St. Thomas and Aristotle, as did the majority of thinkers before the modern period, immerse themselves in the realm of the knowable, not dominated by the emotion of fear, but rather motivated by hope, in particular, wonder. If you are interested in any further reading on this subject, please make use of the following resources in addition to those in the footnotes. Thank you very much.